Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. Please remember that I am not a financial advisor. Also, I have a bias towards the XX network because they are a sponsor of this show and make this show possible. The West won the world not by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by its superiority in applying organized violence. Westerners often forget this fact. Non-Westerners never do.
Safe. At this point, confidence in the currency will fall faster than it can be created. Cost of living increases for government employees, and the costs of all government projects, the subcontractors, the labor, the materials, will all skyrocket. And each time more currency is created to pay for the increases, the value of the currency will fall even faster. In times like that, governments have only two choices: shut down the government and all of its projects and services, send everybody home without pay, turn off the printing presses, and wait for the free market system to discover price levels that account for the quantity of the currency in the supply, or print the currency into oblivion. Governments have always chosen the latter.
We're at this point where the government's supposed to be turning up the printing presses. That's why the Fed is raising interest rates and quantitative tightening. However, the government itself is still borrowing money. They're still funding the Ukraine. They're still fighting COVID. They're doing all the same things. They're funding entitlements. Entitlements that cost billions and billions of dollars. So they're still borrowing money into existence at a higher interest rate. So it costs more to even pay the debt. And now at the same time, the debt ceiling needs to be raised and politicians are fighting back and forth. If there is a delay in the debt ceiling, that's going to scare people that own debt because they think they might not get paid. That will cause problems in the bond market. And the bond market's the reason we have our quality of life. If the bond market sells off, there's something wrong with the bond market, your quality of life is going to change.
But the stored up energy of excess currency creation doesn't have to take place within the United States, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the future. In fact, there is an abundance of stored up currency just waiting to be released right now. As I mentioned earlier, all the dollars we sent overseas to other countries to buy their goods and services are now sitting in their bank accounts, just waiting to be spent. Eventually, the world economy will lose faith in the U.S. dollar and will want to dump it by buying up goods. And as all those dollars come flooding back into the U.S., it will, of course, cause the prices of those goods and services to rise, and could, and probably will, trigger a scenario much like the one I have just finished describing. Throughout history, economists have suffered from what I like to call this time syndrome. This time, they've become masters of the economic universe. This time, they've figured it out. This time, they've tamed the economy. This time, they've mastered the art of infinite currency amplification. This time, a fiat currency will work. History gives this a probability of 0. Each time we sailed toward economic doom, the greatest financial minds in the world were at the helm. Do you really think we should continue letting them steer the ship?
It's funny, when I was a kid, my father used to tell me that he wants to buy American-made. He wants the American-made VCR because it's a better quality. Or he wants the American car because the American car is better quality. You don't hear that very much today, and there's a reason for that. After 2008 happened, the United States exported their inflation. So they printed money and started stimulating other economies. They started spending money in other places like China, and China boosted up their manufacturing and started creating more and more products for the dollars that we're exporting. At the same time, the United States went from a producer to a consumer. And we're just consuming now, and we're producing very little. We are producing some things, but we're not producing nearly as much. We went from 60% debt in 2008 to 128% debt to GDP today. So confidence is being eroded by the amount of debt that we have. And that's what Triffin's dilemma is that, everybody relies on dollars as the reserve currency, yet we're forced to print because the rest of the world needs dollars to progress. We need to inflate the rest of the world so they can keep continuing to produce. And while we're setting up more debts and deficits, other people are saying, hey, they're consumers. They're just eating and benefiting from our hard work, and they're not working. They're just benefiting from everything. So there will come a day when all of this comes to an end. The question is when.
And I've been all over the world. I feel like I've been everywhere except Russia. And Russia is a combatant in a war that's changing the world, and I should go see it. Mm-hmm. But I was planning on it, and I got stopped by the U.S. government from doing it. And I was.
Well, you were going to go?
Of course.
And then what were you going to do?
Interview Putin. Why wouldn't I?
You had it set up?
I was working on it, and they broke into my text messages. The NSA broke into my Signal account, which I didn't know they could do.
Tucker Carlson, as well as CZ Binance, have had their Signal accounts compromised. Signal is a private, centralized application, and it looks like the government has figured out a way to read Signal messages. Now, this could be done through just hacking the phone in general, but I'm not going to take any chances. This is why I like the XX Messenger. The XX Messenger is decentralized and spread across over 450 plus nodes. Or you can join my Speakeasy. My Speakeasy is a chat room for crypto research. The invite's in the description below. So everything that happens on Speakeasy, nobody can see except for us.
Vladimir Putin announced this week that Russia will begin using the Chinese yuan for international payments instead of the dollar. Saudi Arabia is also in talks with Beijing to do the same thing. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, they are in talks with Iran as well to consider an economic alliance with China and Russia. And they can even be joining the BRIC countries, which is an acronym for these countries here, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries all have emerging economies. So what happens if our economy and the U.S. dollar are no longer the world's dominant currency? Former Assistant Treasury Secretary and host of the Monica Crowley podcast, Monica Crowley, is here to weigh in. Monica, great to see you this morning. Let's start right there. What happens if these emerging economies move away from the U.S. dollar towards the Chinese yuan?
Well, good morning, Will. It's great to be with you. And it's really hard to overstate exactly how catastrophic the abandonment of the U.S. dollar would be as the world's global reserve currency. Look, since the end of World War II, the dollar has been the safe place to go, and it's been backed up by a couple of things. It originally was backed up by gold, but President Nixon took us off the gold standard, so there's no hard asset backing up the dollar anymore for the last 50 years. But also it's been backed up by the strength and economic power of the United States and the fact that oil has always been traded in dollars. If that were to end, that would mean the end of the U.S. dollar. Look, there is a perfect storm happening right now, Will.
Russia has partnered with China. In a strategic partnership, Russia will be using Chinese yuan to settle trade between Russia and Latin America, Russia, South Africa, Asia. They're using the Chinese yuan as a settlement vehicle. Now, the issue with using the Chinese yuan is that there are capital controls. Mark Mobius is a billionaire that recently had hundreds of billions of dollars frozen in China because he tried to take his money out of China. So when you put money in China, it's easy, and you can invest in whatever Chinese company that you want. But when you try to take money out, that's the tricky problem. They don't want money to be taken out of China. They want you to reinvest in Chinese companies or whatever, right? So there's capital controls with Chinese yuan. Now, Russia is doing this to bypass sanctions. Well, not necessarily sanctions, but just the threat that their money can be frozen by U.S. banks, right? So Russia's allowed to trade. The sanctions allow for certain trade to happen with Russia, and that's why there isn't a full-blown energy crisis in Europe. Is because Europe's allowed to buy energy from Russia. But now they're switching over to the Chinese yuan, which is a pretty big currency. Now, my major concern is the reaction of the United States to China, right? So China is not exactly a small country. They're one of the largest countries in the world. They're also one of the largest holders of U.S. denominated debt. And I've repeated this numerous times on this channel. If they were to market sell the debt that they have, it would cause pandemonium, havoc, stock market collapse. We probably wouldn't even let them sell it. We'd probably freeze it. We're talking about this escalating into something not so pretty.
The Biden administration has handled the economic war against Russia extremely effectively by building a coalition of almost all the world's advanced economies. That makes it hard to escape from the dollar into other highly valued stable currencies like the euro or the pound or the Canadian dollar, because those countries are also warring with Russia. What might have been a sharper turning point for the dollar's role was Donald Trump's decision in May 2018 to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. The European Union was strenuously opposed to this move, but it watched as the dollar's dominance meant that Iran was immediately excluded from the world economy. Jean-Claude Juncker, then president of the European Commission, proposed enhancing the euro's role internationally to shield the continent from what he called selfish unilateralism. The Commission outlined a path to achieve this. It hasn't happened. There remain too many fundamental doubts about the future of the euro itself. Dollar dominance is firmly entrenched for many good reasons. A globalized economy needs a single currency for ease and efficiency. The dollar is stable. You can buy and sell it anytime, and it's governed largely by the market and not the whims of a government. That's why China's efforts to expand the yuan's role internationally have not worked. Ironically, if Xi Jinping wanted to cause the greatest pain to America, he would liberalize his financial sector and make the yuan a true competitor to the dollar. But that would take him in the direction of markets and openness that is the opposite of his current domestic goals. All that said, Washington's weaponizing of the dollar over the last decade has led many important countries to search for ways to make sure that they do not become the next Russia. The numbers are revealing. The share of dollars in global central bank reserves has dropped from roughly 70% 20 years ago to less than 60% today and falling steadily. The Europeans and the Chinese are trying to build international payment systems outside the dollar-dominated SWIFT. Saudi Arabia has flirted with the idea of pricing its oil in yuan. India is settling most of its oil purchases from Russia in non-dollar currencies. Digital currencies might be another alternative, and in fact, China's central bank has created one. All of these alternatives add costs. But the last few years should have taught us that increasingly nations are willing to pay a price when they want political goals to trump economic ones.
It's funny, somebody sent me this video as well as the Fox video saying, look, mainstream media is copying your channel. And I've been talking about this for a while. We've seen these countries move away from the US dollar. We've seen them, de-risk, so to speak. They went from 70 to 60% dollar holdings. There's a spread to try to make their own SWIFT system, to try to make their own correspondent banking system, to upgrade to CBDCs. Now, digital assets, crypto assets, these are trustless ledgers. There's a lot of utility for these ledgers. When no nation can trust each other, when you're afraid that your money is going to get sanctioned or stolen or hacked or whatever, trustless ledgers are fair ledgers that you cannot corrupt. There's no way that the U.S. could corrupt the ledger. They're neutral by design, and that's what SWIFT used to be, was a neutral protocol. That's what it was designed to be. And now that's no longer true. After the U.S. sanctioned Iran in the past, we took over SWIFT and now kind of govern SWIFT. So when you have protocols that have neutrality and trustlessness baked into the ledger, you can't just simply change it after that. It is what it is.
Monica, the world's reserve currency, you said it's a privilege for the United States for the dollar to have been the world's currency. How does that relate to each individual American? How has that changed or impacted or improved our lives throughout the last several decades?
Yeah, I mean, it's given the United States incredible dominance in the world in terms of the economic system and in terms of trade. It's kept prices down. So whether it's energy prices, whether it's your food prices, the entire global economic system is reliant on the safe and secure dollar. But that is no longer true, again, because we've been printing money like crazy and devalued the power of the dollar and the value of the dollar. But on top of it now, again, oil is the critical linchpin of this. If Saudi Arabia decides to join with America's enemies here and start trading oil in different currencies, that is going to undermine the entire global economic system. And here at home, you know what it's going to mean for us? It's going to mean raging inflation, so much worse than anything we have ever experienced, Will. Yeah. And I'll tell you, they're setting it up so that they can then come to the rescue by introducing central bank digital currencies. If they were to do that, and the United States already has a pilot program, that means the loss of your individual economic freedom, because the government will have total access and control of everything you buy and sell, and the ability to turn it off like that.
Ominous warning. I hear you. Saudi Arabia is the tipping point. Oil trading in dollars is the tipping point.
Saudi Arabia accepts dollars because the dollar market is large enough and vast enough to invest those dollars. Saudi Arabia could take $100 billion that they sold in energy and move it into U.S. markets. They can move it into the stock market. They could sell it. It's liquid enough to handle that. So other countries deciding to pay Saudi Arabia with their currency, what incentive does Saudi Arabia have to hold on to the other countries' currencies? You know, they say that the dollar is the cleanest shirt and the dirtiest hamper, and there's truth to that, right? Now, what is interesting is that Saudi Arabia did a proof of concept with Ripple as well as the Bank of England early 2018. If you see Saudi Arabia accepting other currencies, that very well could be running through Ripple. And on the back end, this just gets converted into USD or whatever currency they choose. And for a good reason, they would want US dollars, because those markets are the only markets that are liquid enough to handle it.
We keep searching for the single replacement for the dollar, and there will not be one. But could the currency suffer weakness by 1,000 cuts? That seems a more likely scenario. The author and investor Ruchir Sharma points out, right now, for the first time in my memory, we have an international financial crisis in which the dollar has been weakening rather than strengthening. I wonder if this is a sign of things to come. If it is, Americans should worry. I spoke last week about the bad geopolitical habits Washington has developed because of its unrivaled unipolar status. It's even more true economically. America's politicians have gotten very used to spending seemingly without any concern about deficits. Public debt in America has risen almost fivefold, from roughly $6.5 trillion 20 years ago to $31.5 trillion today. The Fed has solved a series of financial crises by massively expanding its balance sheet, almost 12-fold, from around $730 billion 20 years ago to about $8.7 trillion today. All of this only works because of the dollar's unique status. If that were to wane, America will face a reckoning like none before.
This is Triffin's paradox. Since everything is tied to dollars, dollars need to have higher and higher deficits for the world economy to expand. If it doesn't, then the world is in a recession. So we need to have higher deficits to promote growth, but this erodes confidence. People look at the deficits and they lose confidence in dollars. So it's a catch-22.
The most interesting outcome of the 3-day summit between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping got limited media attention. Describing their talks, Putin said, "We are in favor of using the Chinese yuan for settlements between Russia and the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America." So, the world's second largest economy and its largest energy exporter are together actively trying to dent the dollar's dominance as the anchor of the international financial system. Will they succeed? The dollar is America's last surviving superpower. It gives Washington unrivaled economic and political muscle. It can slap sanctions on countries unilaterally, which frees that country out of large parts of the world economy. And Washington can spend freely, certain that its debt will be bought up by the rest of the world. The war against Ukraine, combined with Washington's increasingly confrontational approach to China, have created a perfect storm in which both Russia and China are accelerating efforts to diversify away from the dollar. Their central banks are keeping less of their reserves in dollars, and most trade between them is being settled in the yuan. They are also making efforts to get other countries to follow suit.
Confidence in the dollar is being eroded. More and more countries are moving away from the dollar. They're setting up their own systems that are blockchain-based or CBDC-based. The future is distributed ledgers. Between different countries, there needs to be trustless protocols, and that's what blockchains and crypto assets provide. That's going to be the new system. A system where countries can interact with each other without having to worry about currency manipulation or sanctions. A fair system, a level playing field.
The world's reserve currency, being that, having that status has been a real privilege, but we've abused the privilege by wholly reckless monetary and fiscal policies over many years, certainly over the last couple of years, which has really devalued the dollar. On top of that, now you do have this perfect storm of Biden's weakness, his war on American domestic energy production, the Ukraine war, and as you point out, because of all of these things, we've got America's enemies led by China forming a new economic bloc. And all it would take at this point now, because we're at this pivotal moment, Will, is for Saudi Arabia, who has indicated that they're open to this, to say, you know what, we're going to be open to considering other currencies to trade in oil. If that were to happen, there would be a complete implosion of the global economic system, but certainly the American economic system. And if that were to happen, you'd be looking at sky-high inflation, just raging Weimar Republic kind of inflation. If you think inflation is bad now, just wait. But more importantly, we would lose our economic dominance and we would lose our superpower status.
See, the problem with what she's saying is that the results of everything that would happen would result in World War III. We're not there yet. We're not at World War III, even though the potential is there. I doubt most countries want to get into a global world war. So what's more likely to happen is there's going to be agreements and treaties to have public neutral assets in between trade. So dollar hegemony is still there. You still have the deep liquid markets, but the sanctions and capital controls aren't as strong because those neutral ledgers in between, that's where assets can't get frozen. And that seems more of a middle ground than World War III. Every civilization sees itself as the center of the world and writes its history as the central drama of human history. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon where I have ad-free videos. We do weekly discussions on Zoom. I have a Discord, I post research. I also duplicate all of the content over to my Ghost site, which is dmjr.ghost.io. So be sure to check it out.